So we're here to talk about the Teaching and Learning Workforce in Higher Education 2024 report. This report is the second in a series of studies. We're doing three breakout studies um, this year slash 2023. And it's the first time that we're doing this at EDUCAUSE where we're actually not just looking at IT broadly, but we're breaking out into our different program areas at EDUCAUSE and looking at what the workforce looks like for them. So the second report in that series is Teaching and Learning. And we cover a number of areas in the report. So we're looking at just basically the landscape of the workforce for teaching and learning in higher ed. And so the report covers things like staffing and budget issues. It looks at different department and unit sizes and structures and reporting lines. We look at work role experiences, so things like workload, job satisfaction, what people are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, doing their positions. And then we look at things more related to skills and competencies needed now and also in the future, in addition to professional development opportunities and what areas may be lacking or working well for teaching and learning professionals. So I think those are the major components of what we look at in the report. I'm Nicole Muscanell. I'm a researcher. I'm on the research and insights team at EDUCAUSE, and I'll go ahead and let Kathy and Ryan introduce themselves.
Perfect. Yep. I'm Ryan McTaggart. I am also an EDUCAUSE team member. I'm in the professional learning team. So the professional development, the skills, all that kind of stuff that Nicole just mentioned tends to be my sweet spot for work. Kathy?
I'm Kathy Pelletier, and I also am excited to be a member of the EDUCAUSE team here. And I hail from the program area. I'm the director of the Teaching and Learning program. And so I primarily work with teaching and learning professionals, but more and more, especially in the last few years, there have been many folks who reside organizationally outside of a teaching and learning function, but who have a great interest in teaching and learning, whether it's because they report into the CIO or because they are a CIO and are responsible for teaching and learning aspects of their institution.
I think that one of the more interesting things, although it might not be super surprising, I guess, would be the sort of mental health and well-being themes that we see throughout the report. A lot of people had things to say about this in their open-ended comments, especially related to burnout and increases in workloads, which I think a lot of institutions are experiencing, but just seeing how much toll that is taking on people's mental health and well-being and how much of impact it might have on their likelihood to actually stay in their positions.
Yeah.
I thought that was like a really prominent theme and also very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, over 50% are like actively on the job market. That was like a surprisingly unsurprising stat. I think I would agree, like overall, and I definitely want to come back to that, but overall, the thing that stuck out to me was the surprising nature of a lot of it, where it's like people are really burnt out and you're like, yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. We've heard that for years. But now what I hadn't really thought about was how much AI would come up and how there's this whole new area now, but they haven't hired people to do those things, right? So there were multiple points in it that just the amount of work that the teaching and learning community is being asked to do and the kinds of work they're being asked to do, like post-pandemic, hasn't settled. If anything, it's like continued to escalate. Like at one point, a lot of people were reporting up to 7 major responsibilities in one position. I'm like, well, it makes me overwhelmed to read that. So that I think that was and then that related into mental health, but that the combination of just like how much work, how much new work is coming into the field was just kind of like you know it, but when you see it like that and you see the numbers, it's just kind of shocking in a new way.
Yeah. Yeah, I would add a plus one to that as I really like how you put that, Nicole. It's the unsurprising but surprising aspect, and I'll tease a little bit from our AI landscape report that we're publishing soon, where we're finding that there is actually a small number of institutions that are actually creating new roles that are AI specific, and in some sense that makes sense because AI is so new, and we collectively in higher education have a sense of how it is and will be impacting our institutions and our students and our faculty, but maybe not enough to create new organizational structures or new roles. But I think at least in the time being, the teaching and learning professionals really are carrying that load. Um, Particularly when we gathered the data for this survey, faculty were newly introduced to AI tools, and the house was on fire, and the teaching and learning folks really, especially those who, you talk about all those primary areas of responsibility, the folks who are either doing faculty development or helping with instructional technologies, or supporting faculty in other ways for other types of instructional support, really, again, we're carrying that load. And I think, you know, one major theme that I kept hearing in this report is, how is this sustainable? Whether it's more than 50% of the teaching and learning workforce is actively looking for other jobs, or some of the open-ended questions that were featured in the report about the mental health situation of folks that are just feeling that burden. I do think that the number of areas of responsibility was less surprising to me, because teaching and learning is kind of a big bucket, right? And we know that there's lots of different flavors of teaching and learning on different campuses, depending on the organizational structure. But I think just the idea that a person has to be an expert in so many different areas of responsibility, ranging from technology selection to faculty training to budgets and finance. That's just a lot of cognitive load for anybody to carry. So that kind of helps to shape the picture as well.
Yeah. I was curious, Kathy, with your just like knowledge of like the community and the folks that are in the community and conversations you have, did most of this stuff, like, is the things in the report, are those things you hear also kind of on the ground, so to speak, when you're chatting with people? Or was there anything that the report didn't capture as much as maybe certain people are talking about? Or did it feel pretty like spot on?
Yes and no. I think, and I'll put Nicole on the spot in just a minute about to see if there's any open end responses that didn't get included that might support this experience that I have. But it feels like the teaching and learning professional, again, it's not a monolithic group. There's so many different variations, and I think I remember from the report, even the levels of individuals that responded were pretty well chunked out from the executive, with maybe a smaller slice with a quarter-ish of director level, maybe 15-ish% manager, and then individual contributor. So that's a range of at least, even the levels being so different. So their experiences are likely going to be different from each other. But it feels like the conversations I have are kind of bimodal, where on one side, a lot of what we heard in the report about, oh my gosh, I'm carrying so much load. My budget is down. I can't travel. I really miss coming to conferences and meeting with my peers, or, investing in professional development, and that budget's gone. I am just tired and it's really hard. So I do hear that. But I also hear that there is a lot of really exciting innovation happening, and that is kind of the spark that, despite all of those other things that might be kind of depressive elements, the opportunity for innovation, again, especially with AI right now, and even still with digital and hybrid learning opportunities and using data in new ways and serving students in a more personalized way. Like a lot of that student-centered um, innovation and creativity that is an opportunity with the teaching and learning type of role is invigorating and exciting. And I think for those who are staying and committed to their role in their organization, that presents a great opportunity. And one other theme that I'll add that I think is really important, especially Ryan, with your role and your visibility to our community, is about the professional development pathways, where many people shared that they didn't see internal opportunities as much as they would like to, and are potentially turning to places like EDUCAUSE to develop those skills that they know that they need. But I also feel like that's an invigorating opportunity too, when people, even if they have a lot to do, if they have the mental space and the financial support to be able to, and again, maybe it's not a financial commitment, but it's like, yes, you're carrying a lot, but also on Fridays it's professional development day or whatever that. So I think
Hmm.
there's ways that organizations can support their staff, knowing that we're carrying a lot together, but still kind of lighting the fire of inspiration and commitment and that kind of thing. And so, Nicole, I guess I asked you earlier before I actually asked the question, but I would love to know, if did you see stories of that kind of inspiration and opportunity for innovation in the open ends, or is this just a dark tale?
No, I think I saw you said you've seen both, and I think I saw kind of the other end of in terms of innovation, it was more of the we're actually stifling innovation right now because of things like budget decreases, and this is putting us behind, especially behind what other universities might be doing when it comes to finding innovative ways to teach, and also adopt emerging technologies.
Yeah.
Um, so I kind of saw that end of it, but I mean, I think it's unsurprising that we would see at the same time schools just finding creative ways to kind of do more with less, which is that's really a common thing we're seeing across the workforce reports is
Yeah.
a lot of people just having to do more with less. Um, so I think it could go both ways, you know. In some institutions we're seeing this is harming or impeding creativity and innovation, but others are just finding ways to kind of work around and still um, be innovative with less resources.
Yeah. Ryan, I'm curious, are you seeing in your work with folks, related to the competencies that were explored at
Hmm.
your report? I remember one data point, which again is not really surprising, but it's always nice to see things in data where there's a really big gap in the respondents' perception of their competency in finance and budgeting, going from the executive level even to the director and definitely to the manager and individual contributor level. So it makes me worry about the pipeline of
Hmm.
teaching and learning leaders, that if those who are maybe stepping in late soon or at some point to an executive level role are not confident about their skills with finance, for example. Um, do you see this gap? Maybe not just with finance, but in terms of the competencies that people are really hoping to develop as they're engaging with our professional learning opportunities. Where are you seeing the most uptake?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was fun to well, not fun, I guess, but to see that, because actually, and one thing I guess for the teaching and learning community to know is that competency shows up across the board with the EDUCAUSE community. It is IT, teaching and learning, security, privacy. The gap between what I think I need to know about finance and budgets and what I actually know in all those communities tends to be pretty big. And it seems like most people are learning the ins and outs of finance when they get into the executive seat, which
Yeah.
is difficult, you know. And so teaching and learning no exception. But we do try to put that competency into all of our leadership kind of training modalities that we have, because we've kind of identified that. And we're working on like a learning lab soon that will be specifically on finance for anyone in the EDUCAUSE community, because we found out it's not necessarily community focused. It's more like
Yeah.
we all kind of need this thing. And data literacy, same thing. It's like, how do we use data to drive decisions? And like Nicole mentioned, like doing more with less. You better have data, because now you're making decisions on, okay, we want to do both of these things, but we can't. Which one should we do? And data is going to help drive those decisions, or inform them at least. So, but yeah, the finance gap is real. And I mean, even when I was in higher ed, that was the case then too. Like the budgets were kind of this like mysterious thing that were handed down, right? And so I think now we're seeing this desire for people to be more involved, which I think is really cool. We just got to fill the gap and help people, learn it. But teaching and learning professionals who are feeling that way, you are not alone. I can almost guarantee it. Yeah.
Nicole, are there other things that you've seen cut across the multiple reports that maybe feel like a teaching and learning only issue, but maybe it's higher education more broadly?
That's a great question. For the most part, I think there are a lot of commonalities so far and I've had a chance to look at, by the way, the newest one, the IT leadership report as well, just as a reviewer. I don't know what this says about, like, if this is a true difference, or if maybe there's a difference in the type of personalities, and willingness to express such thing. But like the mental health part seemed way more prominent in this report than it did for the cybersecurity and privacy professionals. They also were like, we have excessive workloads and whatnot. But in this particular report, it just seemed that people were really strongly expressing like, this is really impacting my ability to perform. I feel not confident about what I'm doing at my job because I have too many things going on and I can only work on so many things. And so I think for some reason, and I don't know, maybe Kathy, you would have some insight behind why this would be different, but it does seem like the impacts on just well-being and morale were stronger here with this community than with the cybersecurity and privacy professionals.
Yeah, I think kind of personality of the broad group is probably a factor. I mean, we're kind of completely overgeneralizing, but I also, yeah, I remember back in 2020 and 2021 when the teaching and learning staff were really carrying such an emotional load of supporting faculty who also had the emotional load of supporting students, and with mental health and larger societal issues that were really hard for so much of our higher education community overall. And so it might be that is kind of a remnant that we haven't gotten to take a breath and really take care of ourselves. We're still taking care of other people. Now, that being said, I know that the cybersecurity community is, they have really stressful jobs, right?
Yeah.
Because, cybersecurity issues can bring down an institution, right? And so I don't want to minimize that load because that's a different type of stress, but I think the kind of humanness of the teaching and learning experience in working with other professionals, whether they're faculty or staff, or even working directly with students, I think just has a different. It creates a different kind of stress, I guess, than worrying about data breaches and that kind of thing. And another thing we haven't talked about yet, which I think is probably common across the reports, but I think it can't be understated, is the desire for teaching and learning professionals in this report to have access to hybrid work options and how critical that flexibility is to well-being and being able to balance all of, I'm kind of extrapolating a little bit because the report itself didn't necessarily tie these together, but I think talking about the wellness and the commitment and motivation to your institution and carrying a larger load maybe than you would like to, having that flexible work option seems like it could relieve some of that pressure. If I can, it's not work-life balance, but it's work-life integration where you can bring your kid to the doctor and then come home and keep working. And maybe that's not healthy long-term as a society. I think we still don't know yet the extent to which that work-life integration is healthy or not for ourselves as a society. But there is a significant gap. If I'm remembering the numbers right, it's like 85% of respondents wanted access to hybrid or flexible work options, but only 2/3 or so felt like they actually had access to that. So that's something that certainly requires infrastructure, and it requires culture, and there's lots of reasons why an organization can't just flip a switch and then everybody's hybrid, but except when you have a pandemic that starts. But from a long-term perspective, but it is something I think that one of the things, I'm interrupting myself, I know, but one of the things I was thinking about as I was anticipating this conversation is, a lot of the report is kind of a downer. So what can we do about it? There are things that are in our control that we can, as leaders in higher education, that we can really turn to make some impacts on the well-being and the competency and the confidence and connection that people feel in their institutions. And it does seem like the hybrid work option is something that has potential to create some lift in how people are feeling.
And I was surprised about how many did still want that on-campus work option.
Yeah.
Because we didn't ask the question the same exact way in the cybersecurity report. We just asked about whether or not they had access to like remote/hybrid work options. But for this one, we kind of split the two apart, and we asked how important is it to you to have remote and hybrid options, but also how important is it to you to have on-campus work options. And I was just so surprised to see that, like 73% still said, yes, I do. I want to have on-campus options for work. So I guess that makes sense, though. With
Yeah.
being part of the teaching and learning community, you probably can't work entirely remotely from home because that would be somewhat challenging. Um,
And I think it also echoes what we're seeing in our student study as well, where students don't necessarily want online as their number one choice of modality, but they do want flexibility. And so they
Yeah.
want the opportunity to either have a hybrid class or an online class when they need it, but they also want to be on campus too. And so it's interesting that those definitely mirror each other.
Yeah, and I just really liked it because I think we're seeing a lot of these stories in the media where it's just like, it's at least in what I've come across, it just makes it sound like people just only want to work from home now. But this report didn't say that, they just, like you said, it's more about flexibility and being able to kind of pivot if needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think campus community is still really important to folks. And in this world, like, okay, you're in faculty development, but you live thousands of miles away from the faculty, can just be really hard. But if you're doing faculty development, you're probably doing development work, a couple times a week, right? You're not like in front of faculty all day, every day. So you can do some of the prep work and all that stuff. And then you come on campus, but you want to be in front of people and you want to lean into that. And I'd be surprised if we didn't see that in others. I mean, I know in like the IT workforce and things like that, some jobs may not require any in-person, and that might be great, but teaching and learning, it feels like a community that hybrid is almost, it just feels like the right thing. Like it just is like, yep, be there when you're going to be in front of people or with people, and otherwise you don't. And I think one of the things is, and I noticed in the report too, and Nicole fixed me on this, but we also see the disparity between the large institutions and the small institutions, like we always do, right? And I think one thing we're seeing is some of the larger institutions are able to do more of that hybrid option, and some of the smaller may not have the infrastructure and the resources, Kathy, like you brought up. And then you see people moving into, so there's like this shuffling of the workforce happening from institution to institution. Maybe people aren't leaving the whole entire workforce, but they're going to a different campus, or they're working remotely from their old home next to this campus, but now they're working for that campus. And
Yeah.
so that's been a really interesting thing. And I've wondered if that has any effect on the workforce in general, or on burnout. Like, do people feel burnt out because of resources? And the report seemed to make that clear. Like, resources are tough to come by. Doesn't really leave a question for anybody, but that was something I was thinking about as I was reading too.
Well, I do think I'm answering the question you didn't ask, Ryan.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Please do.
One thing I was thinking about, though, that we've kind of barely touched on is the opportunity for community building, and how that can really inspire and connect and re-engage folks who might be feeling burnt out. And I don't necessarily know that our world, higher ed, as a portion of that, has really mastered what does a hybrid workforce look like when it comes to community building, or the other way around. What does community building look like when it comes to a hybrid workforce? And I know EDUCAUSE, as an example, I think we actually do a great job, as somebody who's always been a remote employee here. But it's been really intentional of having goofy Slack channels, or really mindful opportunities to come together as an organization in person. And I wonder if higher education is still calibrating a little bit. And so for those people who might live next to their old campus but work at a new campus remotely, do they feel lonely, and do they feel like they're not part of the crew, or so I as I say this, I also recognize that there's such an interesting tension between community building and professional development, like we were talking about earlier, and the house is still on fire, and we have to get all this work done that we don't even have time or bodies for. And so it's almost the I'm sure there's an ancient philosophy that talks about this, where do less to accomplish more. If someone hasn't said that, maybe I just coined it. But the idea that investing in professional development, community building, connecting people actually helps them be more productive. And I'm certain that there's, Ryan, you probably know some organizations that talks about that. But that also feels like something that institutions can do and invest in, that doesn't take a lot of capital, but still might pay off in terms of employee retention and satisfaction.
Yeah, and related to that, sorry, Ryan.
Nope.
Do you want to
go ahead? No.
I think not maybe related to that. So far across all three reports, the thing that respondents are most satisfied with at their jobs is their peers and colleagues.
Yes.
All three reports.
Yes. That's not uncommon, though. I think that's pretty typical.
Yeah, it's also the reason people leave, if they do leave. Usually, that's a number one across, and that's not higher ed. That's like organizations in general.
Yeah.
Top two reasons people leave a job is always peers and/or managers. So that makes sense. And I think higher ed is one of those beautiful places that people got there because they believe in the work, and then they're surrounded by people that believe in the work, and it's awesome when it's awesome. But I don't know the ancient philosophy that would guide that, Kathy, but I do think it's real. And I think in our work, what we're finding is, we still need to talk to executive leaders about human-based communication. Yeah. Like, you're not talking to cogs in the wheel when you're asking for more work to be done. You're talking to human beings. And those human beings have families, they have things they love, they have things they're passionate about, they're burnt out, they're tired, right? Like there's all these things. And sometimes I think what happened during kind of the pandemic and then coming out of it was there was a little bit of this like, whoa, we have so much to do that I just need worker bees to do it.
Yeah.
And that made people feel unvalued, unseen, unheard. And, you know, Nicole, you brought up like the mental health conversation came up in this community more. Well, I would bet that the need to be valued, seen, and heard on a regular basis would also be high in this community. And I think that's something that doesn't really take any capital, honestly. It just takes a little bit of a different approach. And I I think some leaders in this community are so amazing at that we have people to learn from and to grow with. But like I said, even at the executive level, we cover competencies like that. They're not, the executive program isn't these really complex things that are so hard to understand. It's like, how do you talk to somebody? How do you collaborate with someone else? How do you make people feel valued across the institution? And, you know, I think we can never overlook the value of just caring about the human at the other end of all the work that we do.
Yeah.
Even when it's hard.
Yeah. And one theme too I saw, especially in the open ends, if I remember right, is that when we asked the question if people thought they were reporting to the right person, there were quite a few people who did think that they were, so that's great. But where people didn't feel that was the case, it really reflected this bridging of IT and academics. And sometimes folks were reporting into, the provost line of reporting, but felt like they needed more access to IT. And other times it was flipped, where they were reporting to IT, but felt like they needed to be closer to the academic side of the house. And I think that really it is this is I'm sure that the ancient philosophers were dealing with the issue of IT and academic divide, but I think that creates an additional challenge to that kind of communication and collaboration, where maybe there is a cultural difference between those departments at an institution, or at the very least a process difference, right? And so with so many teaching and learning professionals bridging both technology and academic or faculty work, that they probably feel that tension more so than maybe some of the other folks in IT. And so those leaders too also have to be able to speak many languages to support staff who might come from different backgrounds, or have different motivations for doing their work, or just have different sensibilities and certainly different roles. And so that communication that you're talking about, Ryan, that starts with knowing that you've got a human on the other end. I think the nuance around how to motivate a very diverse set of staff, and how to support your staff in engaging with other departments in a way that is productive and also getting really important work done.
It's very dynamic. I feel like this field, I mean, all fields are dynamic, but yeah, on any given day, the people you're going to talk to, the structures you're going to work on, the topics you're going to think about, I mean, they could cover so much ground, which is, you brought up earlier, Kathy, like invigorating, but also overwhelming at times. And, maybe I will say one thing in the report, and I'm looking at it right now, and it's like staring me in the face. It's in the conclusions. And I think there's also something that shows up in this report that maybe isn't like called out. But one thing that I wonder about, and Nicole, I'd be so fascinated to hear if you actually heard things like this, or Kathy, if you have. But I feel like this community also, and cybersecurity probably too, but there are like these ideas that you would think would have gone away a long time ago, and this community wasn't still fighting for these things, but they are. And the one that's like hitting you in the face is in the conclusions, quote, "The days of sage on the stage are quickly dwindling." Those days dwindled. I mean, in my opinion, like I was doing that kind of work over a decade ago of like, how do we get away from the lecture-based model, the research is so strong. I mean, it's so hard. And I wondered, like, man, they are still talking about this in this report in 2024. I wonder if there's just some fatigue too of like ideas and things that the teaching and learning world has probably been like, okay, you want us to move on to AI, but we're still over here trying to convince people to do like student engagement. That's a hard like balance to measure. And this is all just me because I used to be a faculty member and like I know how that felt. But I don't know, like the two of you does that resonate with you? Or are there other ideas that you think the teaching and learning community are just always kind of after? Because I almost took this deep sigh of like, they're still having to fight that fight, you know? And and that would be fatiguing for me. So I'll kind of stop there. But that is one thing that stuck out to me that I was like, oh boy.
I used to be a faculty member also, Ryan. And the last time I taught was 2020. Oh, the pandemic was just hitting. That's the hot spot. Yes, we all went to remote suddenly. I don't know. I wasn't aware that this was like a thing going on for, I guess, such a long time. Um, but I would agree that probably is just overwhelming to think. Like, I think when you think about faculty, I think it's hard sometimes to be more of a mentor and facilitator and do more student engagement because especially if you don't have TA support, it's just,
Yeah, the
how do
system's not
I
exactly built for it, right?
it's not
Yeah.
really built for it.
Yeah.
Even if you want to do it, it's like, how do I be that person for X many students? Like,
Mhm.
that's kind of impossible.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if that's part of the reason, though, why we're still talking about
Mhm.
this needs to kind of go away or is going away. Um, I also wonder how much of it is maybe a generational thing. Maybe Kathy, you would have some knowledge about this, in terms of, do older faculty differ in their mindsets and approaches as compared to like the junior faculty, which is not
I
something
would
we
need to say
really
see
didn't
data
teach
on
in
that. I think
this
my
report.
experience is that there really is a range. I don't know that it is a generational thing, because I think there are plenty of more senior faculty who are like, oh my gosh, let me try the new thing, and I've got so much experience. I'm confident with some of the other pedagogical elements that I'm building on them, and new technologies bring them my way. So I don't think that is. I don't know. I guess that would be my answers. I don't know. Um, However, I do know, and again, this is a structural thing, that there is a built-in power dynamic between a tenured faculty member and an instructional support staff. And and often instructional support staff do have doctoral degrees themselves, organizationally, they are not equals. And so that instructional designer or faculty development professional needs to be really adept at their influence without authority skills, and really resilient when it comes to encouraging faculty to try new or different things or take different approaches to their courses, which, for a faculty member, that's their baby, right? This is what they do. And so it is probably hard for especially a senior faculty member to hear somebody who is like, oh, let me tell you how to do this better or differently, or why are you doing it that way, or what do you mean you're standing up and lecturing, that's old. And so I wonder if that might be where some of the fatigue is coming in, and the
Yeah.
kind of emotional drain, because if you are working with faculty who are not receptive to those kinds of conversations, it can feel really demoralizing. But again, I don't think that's a faculty problem. I think it's a structural problem in higher education, and instructional design is not necessarily a new field, but I think I do think that the pandemic illustrated the potential value of instructional design, as faculty needed to rethink how they were teaching or learn how to use new technologies that they hadn't used before. but I think we have a long way to go in realizing the collective realization of, oh, this is the best way for instructional designers or instructional technologists and faculty to partner and collectively create an awesome learning experience for students. And then of course that depends on the institution type, where we haven't talked really about the staffing numbers yet, but I was actually really floored by how few I can't remember, you'll have to help me remember how we asked the question, but like, how many of you are there on your campus, or how many people are doing this primary function? And there were very few instructional design and instructional technology staff
Yeah.
compared to, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, the way we asked it was how many FTE positions for each specific position were budgeted for this current fiscal year.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's I guess another piece too of, it's a one instructional designer to all the faculty. That's a big lift. Even if the faculty are all receptive to, I want to learn how to not be sage on a stage. And I've just read all the active learning studies, and guess what? Active learning is very effective in advancing student outcomes and experience. That's still a lot of ground to cover, even with a 100% receptive.
Yes, and some of these are really big institutions. I was very surprised by that as well, Kathy. And I came from a small campus where we only had one instructional designer. And even that seemed overwhelming for her doing that just for our small campus. So I can't imagine being at a school where you have 15,000 plus students and then there's like 3 instructional designers.
Mhm.
One other thing, we haven't really talked about this directly. So I was just with a group of EDUCAUSE members to think about what might be in like a self-assessment related to AI readiness on campus. And one of the things that we talked about a lot was agility and change leadership, and a kind of being able to both lead significant changes in a very changing environment, but also be a part of that changing environment and weather those changes. And so I'm again, not surprising, but like the change management came up so much, I think, throughout, especially as it relates to desired professional development. And so one of the things that's kind of brewing a little bit that I can't articulate quite well yet, is the idea of how can we empower our teaching and learning professionals to actually be change leaders and change sparks. Like how can we, despite the systemic or the structural things in higher education that we've been talking about that might be working against our teaching and learning folks, how might they become actually the seed of change that blossoms and actually cuts across the industry? And Ryan, I know you work a lot with those change competencies in your professional development offerings. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, Nicole, I don't know if the reports will tweeze this out. I would guess they will, but that's another one that seems to be common across the communities. It's not just teaching and learning. I think the amount of change that people have experienced in the last couple of years, and just the okay, there's got to be an actual system or plan to handle this change. No one could have predicted 2020, sure, but like with AI, it's like, okay, we know that this is going to drive change. Can we get in front of it? Can we build systems around it? Can we actually do the change and lead the change instead of the change kind of happening to us, is kind of the theme that we're getting. So we're starting to partner with ProSci, which is a change management, kind of a guru firm, and they're gonna do some trainings, but not just for teaching and learning, but for everyone. But yeah, it is a very common question. And it's also really hard, like just to normalize it for the community, like change management. And I say change management, change leadership are two different things, but I won't
Yeah.
get on that soapbox.
Yeah.
But either way, it's really hard. But I do think for teaching and learning professionals, the first step is like start. Like don't sit in the back of the room and like wait for someone else. Like you can go forward and maybe put a plan out there or talk to some people across campus about, hey, this AI thing or this other thing, like change is kind of coming. And I think if you put yourself out there as someone who's thinking forward like that, even that alone can help, kind of show, hey, we want to be a part of this. Cause I agree with you, Kathy. I think as like doom and gloom as some of the numbers can be in reports sometimes, the teaching and learning world to me is such an innovative hub of people and of systems that it's like, if higher ed is going to change and going to catch up in terms of like student success and things like that, this is where it's going to come from. Like these are the people who are going to drive that. And I think that's just my opinion. And I think there's so many other people on campus that will drive it too. But like, what's the basis of the university and the college idea? It's like teaching students, right? Like student experience. So I think like sometimes though, when I was on, and I was on a big campus, Nicole, so a little different, but our teaching and learning group was kind of like in the background until you called them in, right? And I always wondered like, what would it look like if they showed up first and they brought in ideas first? Now they would probably get a lot of rejection, like you brought up, Kathy, right? And it would be really tiring and you'd have to be really like, keep going, keep going, keep going. And the resilience would be necessary. But I do feel like we're at a time that's like ripe for that. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong and maybe I'm just too like, just go drive change, But I do think that there's room for it. And with some of the new stuff that's coming in, it's a great time to like get some skills, learn about the new technologies, and then go be the person on campus who knows the most about it and help people move forward. And you won't get everybody, but grassroots change is happening more and more in higher ed from what I've seen. And it seems like this report would kind of show that as well. And, but now I'm basically saying, oh, you have 7 things, here's an 8th, but, I don't know. But change management, yes. Every community is trying to work on that. And I think higher ed in general is, honestly, I know student affairs divisions that are doing a lot of change management work. I know administrations that are doing a lot of it. So higher ed is just going through a lot of change. So even if teaching and learning can get on those conversations that are already happening, like, is your admin team or are there other teams doing this work on campus? And maybe you can just hitch a ride and just show that, yeah, we're working on it too. There might already be stuff happening.
Well, and getting back to the human element too, to circle back to that, I remember many, many moons ago when I did the ProSci certification, and it was one of my first introductions to change management. And my mind was blown when they articulated how they describe change, which is, I'm not going to get it all, but essentially it comes down to individual human beings making a decision to act differently, right? That's change. And so as we think about our peers and our leaders and our staff and our colleagues in other departments, we're all human beings, right? And we want the best for students and for each other. And this, I don't know, I don't want to end on a really woo-woo note, but I think that a lot of the report really spoke to that idea of, in fact, what I'm looking at as I look at the report up on my screen is somebody wrote in that emotional awareness is something I think that is and will continue to become more important in the world of education. And so I think that we should listen and really and think about how we're all humans on the other end, and maybe that'll help us all rise to the occasion amidst all this change and challenge.
Yeah. And try to pay people better when available. That was the other thing in the report that I'm like, yeah, it seems about right. Some of those basic things too. And we, in our executive leaders program, we do talk about like, go and do an audit of the basic things. Like, are people being paid enough to live in the college town that you need them to live in?
Yeah.
Because like I know here in Colorado, like our campus towns, good luck. I mean, you may not be able to work at the university and live in that town because of the cost of living and how it's changed. And higher ed, I think just, and I don't even know because this is systemic. And I think one thing the report shows is there's a lot of these things that's like systems level. They're really high up. They're things that have been around forever and ever that we've talked about. And then there's things that are more like, yeah, maybe you can bring in some more professional development. Maybe you can, lean into the human side in individual conversations. And so the big thing that I took away from the report in this conversation is for anyone in the TNL world to be able to peel those two levels apart and understand like systems are going to take resilience and time, and it's going to be difficult. But the stuff that you can do on a day-to-day working with the individual faculty member or the individual student or with your colleagues, get your energy from there and then take it over here and make sure you're doing both. And I think a lot of TNL professionals have just been asked to be in this systems thing so much in the last couple of years that it's like, woof, we're all really tired. And maybe there's room to kind of reinvigorate with the local, the human, side of things. So that's kind of what I've heard, and I've never really thought about it that way. So it's fun.